on the micro details. They'll pick up on one or two words sometimes, a few psukim, one event, and that certainly has a place that's very, very important. But one thing that doesn't get talked about as much is the big picture. And so that's why I would love to make that a focus for us in our shiurim. And if you'd like to get an idea of where some of my ideas are coming from, I'm following on from one of my teachers, or one person who I'd be very proud to call myself a student of. That's Rav Menachem Leibtag. You can find his stuff online. He's got his own website called Tanakh.org with a CH, not to be confused with Tanakh with a Tanakh.org with a KH, which is a completely different website, which is also very good for learning Tanakh. But if you want to find Rav Leibtag stuff, that's where you'll find it, at Tanakh with a CH. So it's his own website. It's not very particularly user-friendly, and it's not a very up-to-date website, but it's got a very high amount of high-quality Torah there. You can also find a lot of his stuff on OU Torah, that's the Orthodox Union, and he's also got a lot of shiurim on another website called TanachStudy.org. And I was a student in some of his shiurim, but a lot of what I've learned from him, actually, I've learned via his websites and the stuff he puts out online. And that's the case for tonight. So Rav Leibtag has 2 points about 2 shiurim online on Parshat Ekev. Parshat Ekev, I think, is a really wonderful parsha, and it's got one of my favorite lines of the whole Torah in it, which is actually not a major feature of this shiur. So maybe I'll just touch on it so that we don't miss it. Here. And this is the line where we say, if you look in Parshat Ekev, which is Devarim Perek Yud, Pasuk Yud Bet. So chapter 10, Pasuk 12.
It's plugged in.
You will find this.
Microphone, because it's not.
Hold on a second.
One needs to mute themselves.
John, could you mute yourself? You have done. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let me just share my screen. Zalmi, would you mind enabling me to share my screen? Okay, very good. So here we go. Just want to touch on this bit briefly before we get stuck into the broader context, just because this is one of my favorite lines in the Torah, as I said. So we're in Devarim Perek Yud, and where we are is, if you recall last time, what's the big picture of Sefer Devarim? Sefer Devarim is 4 main speeches with a few details in between the speeches. And one of the things that we are looking at the moment is we're looking at the second speech, which is the longest speech. It goes from the end of chapter 4, half 3/4 of the way through chapter 4, all the way to chapter 26. And we're now coming towards the end of the first half of that middle speech. So we're in terms of the volume of Sefer Devarim, we've got quite a few Parshat to go. We're not quite halfway, but in terms of the structure, we're actually approaching halfway in terms of the structure of Sefer Devarim. And this is where a beautiful line appears, which is this. Am Yisrael, what does Hashem want from you? Ki'im, lirat Adonai Elecha, that you should be in awe of Hashem your God, Alechet b'chol d'rachav, to follow in all his ways, U'la'avato, and to love him, V'la'avod et Adonai Elecha b'chol levavecha b'chol nefshecha, and to serve him with all your heart, with all your soul. Now he elaborates a bit more in the coming psukim, but I really feel like this could be Judaism's elevator pitch. Sum up, what does God want from you? There's a lot of talk about how do you sum up. If a successful business wants to sum itself up, it needs to be able to be very articulate and clear about what it stands for. And so I think this is a beautiful pasuk where Moshe Rabbeinu just tells Am Yisrael, guys, comes down to this: keep the mitzvot, be yira, ahava, awe and fear of Hashem. Awe and love of Hashem, and to serve Him with sincerity, with all your heart and with all your soul. That's what Hashem wants from us. That has an important place in the structure of the whole of Sefer Dvarim. You'll see this emphasis once again on love of Hashem is a major theme in Sefer Dvarim, and it's appropriate that it should feature towards the center of the book. But anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this line for now, because I think it's very, very valuable. Let's now talk about something different. I want to talk now about rain. Rain is a major topic in Sefer Dvarim. It's a major topic in Parshat Ekev. And it's something that's a very significant point also throughout all of Tanakh. Because in the ancient world, we depended very, very significantly on rain. Even today, we depend on rain. But rain has a special function in Tanakh. It's one of those things, certain things in Tanakh that carry special significance. Fire, for example. Fire is never just fire. When Tanakh features fire, it's never just a simple thing that's fire. It carries a specific significance. We can do a whole shiur one day about fire. And a well is a specific, it's not just a well, it represents something, it's symbolic. There's a lot of things like this. And rain is something that's very, very symbolic. It's not just a natural phenomenon that we experience. It's a big deal. So let's look. And I think one of the great things that about looking at rain in this parsha is that rain features both at the beginning of the parsha and the end of the parsha, and sort of in the middle of the parsha too. So if we're looking at the big picture of the parsha, we looked briefly just in the start. I mentioned the broader context of Sefer Dvarim, which is the big picture. We're also going to see how rain features here and how that actually harkens back to Sefer Bereshit. So there's the big picture there too. So let's turn to the start of Parshat Ekev, which is in Dvarim Gadia Tanakh. It's Dvarim Perek Zayin. Here we go. Okay. So we start off with a classic reward and punishment style thing. But once again, being that Sefer Dvarim, emphasis on love, right? If you keep the mishpatim, these mishpatim they're going to be coming. V'shamar Hashem Elokecha lecha et habrit v'et hachesed asher nishba levatecha. You keep the mitzvah. Now, we hold up our end of the covenant with Hashem. He'll hold up His end, and He'll treat us with chesed, which means it's chesed in Tanakh. It's not just kindness; it's love as action, love in action. That's chesed. Asher nishba levatecha, that He swore to your forefathers, v'ahevcha, and He will love you. V'erachacha v'yirbecha v'erach privitnecha v'priyad matecha. He will bless you. He'll bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, your grain, the produce of your vineyards, and your oil, your olive groves. Tirosh is there's a Israeli brand of grape juice called tirosh, because it's the biblical word for grape produce. Yitzharecha is the biblical produce of the vineyard, of the oil of the groves of olives. Shgar lafecha v'ashtrot zanecha. This is the calving of your herd, the lambs of your sheep, on the land that he swore to your fathers to give to you. Okay. So then we have an elaboration on this of the blessings that we'll have if we keep to Hashem. And then there's a bit of encouragement that follows about conquering the land when we get freaked out. It's a lot of, looks difficult. However, what follows then is a encouragement to how we can differentiate the land of Israel from the land of Egypt. Okay, hold on a second. All right. Hold on a second. So if you look at Parshat Chet Pasuk Zayin, let me just skip ahead to there. Parshat Chet Pasuk Zayin. Here we go. Ki Hashem Elokecha meviacha el eretz tovat. We've just had a little bit of a description about life in the desert, and now we're going to be talking about the land of Israel. What's the land of Israel like? It is Eretz Nachalei Mayim. It's a land of streams, wadis, streams of water, ayonot, which are springs, which are homot. Hamayan has this word, ayonot, mayanot, same word. Utuhomot, which is fountains, yotzim babikar v'har, that come out of the hills and the valleys. Eretz Chitar Sarai Gefen Teinav Rimon. We have this famous line of the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael. Teinav Rimon Eretz Hashem and Dvash. Eretz Asher Lo b'miskenu tochal ba'lechem lo techsar kol bat. Eretz Asher Avanah Baranzel Meretz Achtov v'chashem. It's a land of where we can have access to all these natural resources of iron and copper. We have a mitzvah here. A mitzvah to bless Hashem, thank Hashem, not only for the food that we eat, but also for the land from which that food grew. So we need to be appreciating the land that we're about to go into. Then we need to be. Then Hashem says, "Be careful that you don't forget Hashem. You don't suffer the failure of the challenge of affluence." And what follows is this idea that, you could grow arrogant. You forget Hashem that took you out of Mitzrayim, the house of slaves. You forget when you were dependent on Hashem. When we're dependent on Hashem, we know we need to be good people in order to be worthy of Him taking good care of us. But if we are already taken good care of, we think we don't need to be worthy anymore. We can forget about that. And that's true too. Yeah. What do you mean?
When you see Hashem and things are good, and things are bad, you're like, where's Hashem?
That's true. That's true. So let me modify what I said. That when we were highly dependent on Hashem, when we were almost living hand to mouth from Hashem, exactly, the man. That the man is supposed to be a very educational experience. If we see, Hashem goes back and emphasizes the man right here. Look, pasuk Tetzayin, Hamalicha man. You forget Hashem, the one who fed you man, the one who taught you is dependence on Hashem. What's the point of giving us man all these years? The point is that we should grow to recognize that we depend on Hashem. And this is not to depend on miracles. But the point of it is to do you good in the end. What is this? It means that we should never say what we're going to say in the next passage. we should know that when we go into Israel eventually, it's not that we create our own success. We still depend on Hashem, even when we're investing our own efforts. So rather, instead of making this mistake, we have to remember Hashem. Hashem is the one who gives us the power to generate wealth, to generate the multitude of goodness that we can have in our lives, in order to fulfill His covenant. This is a very important point. Hashem gives us the means that we need to do the job that we need to do. If we're doing the job that God gave us, then He'll give us all the resources we need to do that job very, very well. It's like if a truck driver is meeting his targets and is being efficient, he's going to get an upgrade to his truck. He's going to get the latest truck. He's going to be worth investing in. Going to get a bigger truck. But if the guy is lazy and doesn't arrive on time, then it's not worth investing in him to give him a better truck, to give him a better resources. So because it's probably not going to make the most of them. So that is the context for us receiving things. This is what Hashem is saying to us. You have a job to do. And you've got to maintain your attitude and make sure that's the correct approach to the good that you get in your life. But we're going to see that the whole thing started with a description of Eretz Yisrael. The description of Eretz Yisrael being a place that's dependent on water, dependent on rainwater specifically. Go back to Pasuk Zayin. It's a good land, a land of streams, right? Nachal Mayim. But what's a nachal? The nachal in Israel is it's a long, elongated, sometimes winding valley between hills. And that often has a stream at the bottom of it if it's been raining, but it often doesn't if it hasn't been raining. What is a ma'ayan, a spring of water? A water spring works like this. You have water that gathers on the ground, it seeps into the ground, and over time, specific underground channels become more common so that the water becomes sort of used to going through certain areas, and then it sort of pools and generates pressure such that it's pushed up again in a different place. So that all that water gathers and then is pushed up in a different place. So what I'm trying to say is that a spring is also rainwater. So a wadi has rain, a nachal has rain, is dependent on rain. A ma'ayan is dependent on rain. And the tohomot is these big issuing fountains, which are also dependent on rain. They come out of the side of hills. And that is the source of all the affluence that we need to bear in mind. We need to remain grateful to Hashem. That's Birkat Hamazon, etc. Okay, but all starts with rain. Let's flip to the end of the parsha. We're going to see rain pop up again in a different context. So we'll go to Perek Yud Aleph. Perek Yud Aleph of Devarim. So Pasuk Yud. Okay. So interestingly, in the middle of Parshat Ekev, Moshe retells the Jewish people some of the history of some of the things they did wrong. Basically, he's trying to tell them, don't think that you're getting Eretz Yisrael because you're so much more deserving than everybody else. It's a funny thing. We often like to think that Hashem kicked out the nations of the land because they were undeserving and gave it to us because we are deserving. Moshe says, it's not because you're so deserving. It's true, they're undeserving, but you're also not particularly, you shouldn't be arrogant, right? Moshe is trying to warn us against arrogance, because as soon as we become arrogant, we think that we're good. We don't have to worry about what we do anymore. But we always need to make sure we are holding ourselves to a high standard of behavior. Okay, so, I'm on the wrong track. I meant Yud Aleph, not Yud. Okay, Devarim. Yeah, Aleph. Okay. So we need to basically bear in mind all these important messages, and although we may remain long in this good land, which is the Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. Ki ha'aretz asher atah v'Hashem l'rishta, because the land you're coming into to inherit, Eretz Mitzrayim here, asher yatzati misham. It's not like the land of Egypt. Asher tizra'ed zarecha, v'shita b'raglecha ki gan hayarak. That you will sow your seeds and water with your foot like a vegetable garden. What is this referring to? Rav Liebtag describes this as like a tap, like turning on a tap in the ancient world. The Nile in Egypt was a constant source of rainwater that came from the mountains, which was a reliable, steady source of irrigation for their agricultural system. So they had a whole bunch of canals that would come off the Nile, and because the Nile was very big and will also reliably flood or reliably swell, so they were able to predict where the water would flow, and they would dig a canal. And all they needed to do to open the channel to the canal was kick away the water, the wall of dirt that was blocking the entrance to the canal, and then the water would flow through. So that is how they would ishkita b'raglacha. They would irrigate using their foot. Seems like an extremely easy method of irrigation. Just kick away the barrier, the water flows in, and you're good. But Eretz Israel is not like that. Even though Eretz Israel does have a river. Quiz question quick. What's the river that Eretz Israel does have? The Yarden River. Good. Thanks, Salmi. The benefit of being here in person. Get the questions. That's it. So the Yarden River is a major river in Eretz Israel. We're actually going to have a look at the Yarden in a little while. But the important thing to note about the Yarden is that it doesn't flow through the middle of Eretz Israel, unless you consider Eretz Israel, including Reuven and Gad and Menashe. But if you think about Reuven and Gad and Menashe and the fact that it was in those days it was a highly fertile area, that was actually on the banks of the Jordan. And so, in a sense, they are not getting the benefit of Eretz Israel being different to Egypt. The main thing about the Jordan to bear in mind is that it does not flow through the middle of Eretz Israel. And second main thing to realize is that it is very, very low down. As we know, the Dead Sea is what the Jordan River flows into, lowest point on earth, which means that you can't use canals to irrigate with. So, and it won't reliably flood and swell like the Nile River, and then you just dig a canal, which can then irrigate a field, because the Jordan River is lower than all the lands around it. If you go to visit the Dead Sea, you'll see on either side of the Dead Sea, there's what look like mountains. On the Jordanian side, there's mountains, and on the Israeli side, it doesn't really seem like it's mountains, but it's a huge descent. It's like a descent down a mountain to the Dead Sea. And so you're not going to, and to the Jordan River, you're not going to be able to dig a canal to use that to irrigate. So even though it has a river, for those two reasons, it is not going to function the way the Nile functions. What does Israel have instead? It's a land of mountains and hills. Limtar hashamayim tishteh mayim. You will drink water by the rain of heaven. Matar hashamayim. Limtar hashamayim tishteh mayim. You will drink by the rain of heaven. Eretz asher Adonai Elohecha doresh ota. It's the land which Hashem, your God, seeks it. He's focused on it. Always. Einei Hashem Elohecha ba. Mereshit hashana v'ad achrit hashana. The eyes of Hashem, your God, are upon it from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. What follows then is the very famous V'hayim Shamoah. Now, V'hayim Shamoah is a very important part of our daily ritual, which is the Shema, the second paragraph of Shema, which has its own significance in the context of Shema, being that the first paragraph of Shema, in a sense, is setting up the ideal relationship, one of love and complete idealism with Hashem, purity of worship, the fact that everything we do should be about love. And Shema is a bit of a coming back to reality that sometimes our life isn't like that, isn't pure and loving. And therefore, we have systems in place to ensure that when we don't have that internal love-based motivation, we can still do the right thing. And that is the reminders that we get. And what are the reminders? If you do keep my will, now this is going to make more sense, I hope. If you keep, it's not just reward and punishment, it's rain and lack of rain. I'll give you the rain of your land in its right time if you listen to me, if you keep the mitzvah. Your real makosh, the early rain and the late, we've got different words for rain. We've got matar, which is general rain. We've got yoreh, which is the early season rains. We've got malkosh, which is the later season rains. With the same phrases we used earlier, if we keep the mitzvot, then we'll get the rain, and then we'll be able to gather in the dagan, tirosh, and yitzhar, the produce of the grain fields, the vineyards, and the olive groves. Then you'll have also produce for your animals. And then what about if you don't keep the mitzvot? Hashem will be angry with us. He will close the heavens. There will not be rain on the land. And the land will not give its produce. And then you will be lost from the land. Then you'll do teshuvah, and then you will start keeping the mitzvot again, teach them to your children again, and this will be the key. This rain system is not just functioning as reward and punishment. This is functioning as a way of keeping us on task, on the job, of doing what we're supposed to do with Hashem. What's the message here? In Mitzrayim, we lived in a world where we didn't need as much reliance and dependence on Hashem because we had the Nile, which is, you can understand why the Egyptians worship the Nile. The Nile is the provider of life. But in Eretz Yisrael, we get our life from Shamayim. It's an amazing thing if you think about it. What is rain? Rain is life-giving water that materializes seemingly out of nothingness in Shamayim. It's a direct living symbol. It's almost a symbol of our dependence on Hashem that is so obvious that it's almost not a symbol anymore. It's almost like somebody wrote it down. We depend on our Father in heaven. Avinu Shebashamayim. We depend on Hashem. Hashem gives us life. How do we know this? Well, where does our life come from? It comes from up in Shamayim. It's not a metaphor. It's literal as well. Our rain comes from Shamayim. So the point of having a land which has this inbuilt dependence on rain is also an inbuilt dependence on Hashem. It teaches us to depend on Hashem. Okay? Now, it's still, as Rav Liebtag says, might not be an easy life. We might prefer a more secure life. And in fact, in modern Israel, I remember one of my teachers, Rav Yaakov Maidan, he told us in the yeshiva that he went to visit one of the huge Israeli desalination plants. And he was amazed by what he saw. Wow, it's incredible. He was so happy to see the fact that Israel was learning, in a sense, to be extricated from its dependence on rain, that over time had led to droughts and tragedy that followed those droughts. However, he said to us all in the yeshiva, I was thinking, even though this is a wonderful thing that we're so almost like overcoming nature, I was also wondering, like, what about this message that we get from Eretz Yisrael? That Eretz Yisrael is a land which depends on rain, and we get our relationship with Hashem from it. And that year, I don't know if you guys remember, was a year where there were terrible bushfires in Israel. And in Israel, bushfires not like in Australia. Australia's bushfires are part of the natural ecosystem, and many of the trees even need bushfires every so often to germinate properly. In Israel, it's not like that. Every tree you see there was hand planted by someone, and once the trees get burnt down, they're often gone. And it was intensely painful for everybody with a keen sense of the sacrifice of the Israeli pioneers. And he said to us all, I now understand that despite the desalination plants that give us water for drinking, we still are dependent on rain to give us the moisture and the vegetation to avoid bushfires like this. So even today, we're dependent on rain in Eretz Yisrael. I'd like to just revise what we've just done. We've looked at the start of the Parsha, which is talking about don't get complacent. When you get rain, you need to fight the challenge of affluence. In the end of the Parsha, we have this idea of rain as an inbuilt directive to turn to Hashem. Now I want to look at other places in Tanakh, mostly in Parshat, where rain features significantly, and we're going to see similar idea coming up there as well. So let's flip. One of the first references to rain is in the creation story, second creation story. Theoretically, you could say it's also in the very beginning in Perek Aleph as well, but it's not explicitly rain. This is the expression of ve'ed yaleh mina, whatever. We'll leave it because it's not explicit. But here we go. Perek Bet, but in the second, where Perek Bet really should start. The Christians started Perek Bet with the Archbishop of Canterbury made a grievous error in the first when he made the prakim. Some of them were good, some of them are terrible. The prakim of Megillah Eicha, great job, absolutely right. The prakim of Bereshit, not great. Anyway, first Perek, he made a big mistake. Should never have started there, but where it should have started is here in Pasuk Dalet. This is the story of the heaven and earth when they're created, when Hashem made the heavens and the earth, and any shrub of the land before it was in the field, before it was on the earth, and any grass of the field before it had sprouted, for Hashem had not brought rain on the land. And there was no man to work the land. This is a bit of a difficult pasuk. It seems like it's saying that Hashem didn't bring any shrubbery, any plants, because he hadn't brought rain and humans to work the land. So it seems to imply that no grass or shrubs or any plant life would grow without the presence of humans and rain, which doesn't seem to be quite right in terms of the causality of the way we know. We know that forests spring up without humans present. And so what's really going on here? And then we have this beautiful pasuk next, number 6. This aid, which is a mist, rose up from the earth and watered all the face of the land. This mist, by the way, is the first presence of a cloud, and Hashem's presence appearing in a cloud and giving life to the whole earth. We see that Hashem chooses to appear in a cloud. What is a cloud? A cloud is the provider of rain, right? So that's why perhaps why Hashem chooses to appear as a cloud so frequently. A cloud also is inscrutable, right? So you can't see through a cloud if it's a nice big cloud. And so it also is a living message about Hashem, is that you cannot comprehend Hashem. But another message is he's the provider of rain, provider of life, and affluence as well. So what's going on in this pasuk? Let's have a look at Rashi. There we go. So, here we go. So, hold on. Okay, so he explains what term means. Kol term shebamikra lashon ad lo. Okay, before it was in the ground, so before it existed. Okay. I'm just going to skip this grammatical bit. So what's going on? So, Shenigmara Briat Haolam, when the creation was completed, Bashishi, on the 6th day, Kodem Shenivra Adam, before humanity was created. Kol Esav Hazader Terem Yitzmach, Vadayin Lot Tzamach, and all the vegetation of the field before it had sprouted. In other words, it still hadn't sprouted. V'gimul shekatuv totzei haaretz lo yatzu ela petach karka amtu ad yom hashishi. So he explains, what's going on here. Hadn't the plants already been created? So yes, he says they've been created, but they haven't sprouted on their own yet. So what's going on here? Ki Elohim tir. Why didn't he bring rain? Because there was no man to work the land. There was no one recognizing the goodness of rain. When humanity came along and realized that they're required, he davened for them. And they came down. And then the trees and the plants grew. What Rashi is doing is he's saying that this pasuk, which sets up this bizarre causality about the presence of rain and plant life, is to set up this idea that from the very beginning, rain is designed as this metaphor of life coming from the heavens, coming from Hashem. And even in the very first instance of rain, we see not the causality, but rather the purpose. This pasuk is not describing what causes the plants to sprout, because the causality is off. It's describing the purpose of rain. It's telling us the purpose of rain is to serve as a reminder for humanity, to turn heavenward, to turn to Hashem. So that is rain, in its very first instance, is showing us as a directive turn to Hashem. And so we see how important it is that Eretz Yisrael, as the center of Hashem's focus on the world, is a place which emphasizes the ultimate purpose of rain, which is to direct us to Hashem. Now, everything in Sefer Bereshit has a story to it as well. And a lot of the ideas that we see as direct laws or direct instructions throughout the rest of the Torah, we see as stories in Sefer Bereshit. So let's have a look at the stories of Abraham and Lot. Hold on, I can't remember exactly the prakim here. So you might have to bear with me for a second. Okay. Yes, it is. Let me just. All right, so here we go. Sorry. First of all, we see Hashem says to Abraham, "Lech lecha me'aretzecha v'moledchem beit Elecha el Arta Shereka." Go for yourself, lech lecha. Go to Eretz Israel, right? I'll bless you. You're going to be great there. So what happens? He does. He goes there. He comes to the Shechem, to Elon Marais, the Knanis there. Okay, and then Hashem promises him all this stuff. And then immediately, what? There's a famine in the land. Why? Because there's no rain. And what does Abraham do? He goes to where there's water. That's Egypt. That's Mitzrayim. Why is there food in Egypt? Because they have the Nile. They don't need rain. When it doesn't rain throughout the Middle East, that's okay, because they don't they rely on the Nile instead of rain. This next story really emphasizes this the way this works. Vayal Avram mimitzrayim hu v'ishto l'char v'levalut imul hamigba v'Avram kaved mod b'mikneh v'chesed v'zahav. Avram was now very rich. Upon leaving Egypt, anybody remember what happens in Egypt that makes Avram into a rich man? Sarah, yeah. Go on, online crowd. What happens in Egypt that turns Avram into a rich man?
Yeah, Pharaoh tries to take Sarai and he's embarrassed, and then pays Abraham off.
Very good. He pays Abraham off. Pays him lots and lots of money. So, in a way, the what seemed like a moment where Hashem was not delivering to Abraham, right? He tells him, "Go to Eretz Israel, and you're going to be. I'm going to take good care of you. You're going to be a great nation." And then immediately it seems like, oh, it's not happening. Abraham goes down to Egypt, but Hashem does take care of him, and he becomes very wealthy there. It seemed like, at first glance, going to Israel was going to make him into a pauper, but actually, the fact that he had to go then down to Egypt afterwards made him into a rich man. Okay, so we see that Hashem is indeed providing for Abraham, despite what seems to be the case with the famine and stuff.
But he's criticised for going down to Egypt, and Ramban famously brings Masei Avot Siman Levanim, that from this we are going to have to go down to Egypt, and then we'll come out with great wealth.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. You could definitely go down that route. Shall we follow that route a little bit further? So David, what would you say Abraham should have done, and what would Hashem sort of be saying to Abraham as a result of what he should have done?
Yeah, I mean, at that point he's Avram, by the way, but that's okay. I mean, there's two schools of thought. One is that yes, he had to go down to Egypt because he couldn't, Pikuach Nefesh, he can't rely on miracles, so he did the right thing to go to Egypt. And the other school of thought would be that he should have had trust in God that he'd keep him alive if he's in the land. And we look at it in modern times, and we're definitely encouraged into mode B. We're definitely encouraged to say, look, things can be tough in Israel, but don't just pack your bags and go back down under when things get a bit tough. Have faith that things will be okay in the land. But there is another model that when we do go into diaspora, that we can come out of that with riches, but it's riches for the purposes of going back into the land.
Very good.
Not for staying in diaspora forever and a day until we're thrown out.
Nice. I like that. So you see then Abraham doing what you just said, which is return to Eretz Israel.
I like that too.
Nice. So, but then what happens is very, very significant. What's the result of Abraham being wealthy? The result of Abraham being wealthy is
he falls out with a lot.
Very good. Lot also is wealthy. He's got sheep, cattle, and tents. The land could not support them living together. They had so much they couldn't stay together. רואה מקנה לוט, והכנעני והפריזי, אז יושב בארץ. There was a quarrel between their cattle. There's not enough to support them. There's not enough pasture to support them. So it makes sense that they would be fighting. That there would be, when there's scarce resources, not enough to go around, that leads to fighting. The Canani is living there as well, so it's not necessarily an easy place for them to live politically. Let's not fight. We are brothers. Is not the land before you. Let us separate. Let me cover up the translation here. If you want to go small to the left, I'll go to the right. If you want to go to the right, I'll go to the left. Did anybody spot the translation before I hit it on the screen? You guys know what's the other translation of left and right? Small and yamin.
West and east.
Close. Close. You want to try again, or somebody else? With
North and south.
north and south, correct, right?
Oh, obviously.
So in Tanakh, it's important to realize that the default direction that a person is facing is not north. Our compasses and maps today all point north, but back in the days of Tanakh, the default position was what's forwards? How do you say forwards?
Wasn't it east and west? Because it was where the sun came up. The sun came up. The only thing they knew.
Very good. So kadima is forwards, right? It also means correct, east towards where the sun comes up, right? So kedim is forward, kadima is forwards. It also means east. So therefore, yamin is south. Taiman, Yemen is to the south, right? And small is north. Okay. So Abraham is saying to Lot, where are we right now? We're in. Let me see. Bet El. So yep. They're in Bet El, which is in the Judean hills, I believe. So he says, if you want, you can go to the north, and I'll go south. If you want to go south, I'll go north. And Lot surprises Abraham. Where does he go?
He goes to Sodom.
Which is
South.
close. East. Right. It's on the Jordan. It's on the Jordan plain, right? What's Abraham said? We are in the hills. Eretz Harim Uvkaot. Eretz Israel is a land of hills and valleys. We are in amongst those. Let's stay amongst those. Why? So we can continue to depend on Hashem. We were in Egypt just now, which was a land which had a Nile, but we're in Eretz Israel right now. Let's embrace that. We'll stay amongst the hill country. But Lot rejects that, and he goes to the one place in Israel which is like Mitzrayim, which is the Jordan River. And what's on the Jordan River is Sodom, right? Ki chulam mashkeh. There's plenty of pasture there. Why? Because it's right on the river. It's worth mentioning that the Jordan River, probably in days of Tanakh, was probably way, way, way wider than it is today, as we see from stories in Shmuel with David HaMelech and people crossing the Jordan River on boats and taking a long time, whatever. So basically, yeah, probably significantly wider than it is today. Anyway, this is before Hashem has destroyed Sodom, but what's basically going on? Lot is saying, I choose Egypt. It's not saying I choose Sodom. I choose what I saw in Egypt, a life which is not dependent on Hashem. So it's obvious now why people of Sodom are less morally well guided than the people of the rest of Eretz Israel, or rather, they're so evil because they don't need that dependence on Hashem. So what's the common theme here? Lot is choosing the Sodom lifestyle. He's choosing the Egypt lifestyle. He's choosing the lifestyle that doesn't depend on Hashem, doesn't depend on rain. Rain equals a relationship with Hashem. Rain symbolizes dependence on Hashem. Rain itself is a living message. It's a living metaphor. Life comes from Hashem. Life comes from the sky, from the heavens. The cloud. God who reveals himself as the cloud is the source of the rain that's our life. Eretz Yisrael has this built in. This is something that we see from the very beginning of featuring of rain in the Torah, and we see it repeatedly through Parshat Ekev as well. Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to live with the message of the rain. Know that we're dependent on Hashem, even when we're putting in all our own efforts to get by and earn our wages and earn our living. We should not say, Kochi v'otzim yadi asali et hachayil hazeh. We should remain grateful to Hashem. We should not think it's all up to or because of us. Even though we put in our efforts, we still rely on Hashem, just like we did in the desert.
Marcus,
Go, yeah.
I once gave studied about Eliyahu and what happened with the prophets of Baal, and I found out
a story that's featuring here. Right, if we're going to look at rain throughout the rest of Tanakh, rain in the days of Eliyahu Navi is certainly a major topic.
And I looked up in Encyclopedia Judaica about that Baal was the weather god. And when Eliyahu declared a drought, and then the siman that Hashem was with them was that now the clouds coming and and it's going to rain, and it's all of a sudden it rains really hard and breaks the drought. But there's the whole thing about God bringing the rain or the weather god, Baal. It's a bit tricky in a way. And now today, of course, you have the meteorologists and the El Nino and all of that. And there was who needs God when it's actually meteorology and El Nino, and people don't want to think there's any connection between rain and God.
Oh, that's definitely not true, Ruth.
What was that?
Because you still completely depend on Hashem for rain. They had prayers for rain, even the non-Jews, when there was a drought in Australia. I mean, you can predict the weather now, but you can't create rain. I'm saying people still realize that it's God-given. I think most people do.
You know how Rabbi Sachs always said, there's the problem with the God of the gaps, and people say, in that book about science and religion that the great partnership or whatever.
I don't know it, but
so he talked about the God of the gaps and how people don't believe that there's a connection between God but now that there's scientists can say when the rain is coming and that kind of stuff, and it's superstitious to think. I'm just putting the other side. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's all global warming, the rain. Come on, there's no God involved in this.
That's true. You're right. Global warming is about it being man-made. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true.
So God gives us everything, but then here comes global warming because we've created the problem.
Right.
People like global warming and climate change thing is like a religion for people.
Yes.
The new religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's probably a bit off topic.